California, so you will definitely be hearing some background noise that I really have no control over, but as you probably know, I tend to layer in rain sounds from time to time as it is, and so perhaps this will work in my favor because this is real rain happening right now. So today has been a highly requested video from one of Neon Moon Whisper's most loyal followers, Richie. This one is for you, my friend. Other people did vote for this one when I posted it as an option in a previous video, but Richie has not backed down about me covering this one, so here you go. Today we are going to be talking about the Cannibal Island of Death. The Cannibal Island that we are going to talk about today has many myths and rumors surrounding it, and a specific legend has perpetuated ever since it occurred. The legend goes that Cannibal Island remained just that, a place where a cannibal tribe grew unnoticed by the world and continues to exist in the wilds of Siberia to this day. So, we are going to talk about all that transpired on the Cannibal Island of Death and what it has become today. Let's get our housekeeping out of the way. As always, I will post a comment down below and pin it, and you will find 3 cases that I would like to cover, and I would love your vote because I want you to choose what I cover here in the coming weeks. And second and final request, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe if you enjoy the content that you hear today. With that said, let's jump into the video. So, in the cold, desolate lands of western Siberia, there lies an island called Natsino, located on the River Ob. The rural location was mostly visited by natives of Tomsk Oblast, who cut the bark from the trees to be used in construction and various foods. In September of 1933, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin received a detailed report of a secret experiment gone wrong. Stalin and many of his close aides were disturbed by what they read and would log this report for the next 50 years in the hope that the world would not realize what had actually occurred down on Natsino. Just 5 months earlier, in May of 1933, 6,700 prisoners were deported to the island to create a unique settlement where the prisoners could cultivate the island and make it usable enough to ultimately be home to a burgeoning community. But it went very, very wrong. Less than 3 months later, at least 4,000 people on the island had either disappeared or were found dead. When investigators arrived, they discovered human flesh hanging on the trees and mass grave sites back in February of the same year, the head of the infamous Gulag prison camp, Matvey Berman, and head of the Soviet Union secret police, Genrik Yagoda, came up with what they believed was the perfect plan to move millions of people to Siberia. Now, Siberia, if you look at it on a map, is so large that it actually makes up most of the Russian mainland, stretching from the Ural Mountains in the west to the Pacific Ocean in the east. Much of the land sits on the Arctic, which makes the northern sections virtually uninhabitable. And so it was Berman's and Yagoda's plan to change this. And by deporting people to Siberia, they could use them to cultivate the land and create populated, self-sufficient regions that were otherwise barren. And the plan had been implemented many years before using agricultural workers with varying success. Except this time, the first wave of the plan was to use convicts and peasants to cultivate the land before sending your standard civilian there. However, unlike the agricultural workers' plan, this time around there were neither the resources nor the manpower to support it. But still, they moved forward with this regardless. The plan would be approved a month later, despite the ongoing famine that was going on in the Soviet Union at the time. And in May, the deportation of people began. After the 1917 revolution, the passport system was abolished to control movement of Russians within the country. The system was revived shortly before the Nazino tragedy in an effort to cleanse Moscow of criminals, antisocial civilians, and peasants not conducive with productive work in the city. Everyone that was deported to Nazino were those who were deemed unable to obtain a passport under the new system, and that was basically anyone who didn't fit in with the plan to reinvigorate the Soviet Union. Thousands of people from Moscow and Leningrad were arrested along with prisoners from the Gulag, and they began the arduous journey of migrating to the desolate island on the river Ob, and that would total to a number of almost 86,000 people that were arrested in Moscow and deported to Siberia. Another 5,000 people were taken from Leningrad, and of those 5,000, 6,700 people were sent to the Nazino Island. The deportees were transported on trains through various camps northward towards the barren lands of Siberia. River transport was initially halted due to ice buildup on the water, but when the ice cleared at the start of May, the camp leaders were pleased to be able to move the people, as they viewed that many of these deportees were not people that they wanted to be around. Some were sick, and so they looked at them as contagious and unhealthy. And during this time, there would end up being various revolts and riots that took place along the way that were pretty quickly subdued by armed guards and members of the military overseeing this entire process. In order to get these people over, they had to use 4 large river barges. the authorities that were put in charge of Nazino were like beginning to worry pretty early on, because they knew that there was not enough food on the barges to keep these people strong. Like, all of these people were pretty much kept below deck and fed 200 grams of bread per person per day. You guys, 200 grams of bread is like maybe a slice of bread. Like maybe a little bit more depending on the kind of bread that it is. But it is nothing at all. Now, when they really realized that there was not enough food to sustain the deportees and the people moving along with them to oversee it, they requested to turn back, but were forced to carry on to Nazino to carry out the plan. When they arrived on the island, not only was there no food left, but there was literally no shelter, and absolutely no way that almost 7,000 people were going to survive there. The only thing that was left on the barges other than people was approximately 20 tons of flour. But there was no food, no tools, no cooking utensils, no wood for shelter, and no additional clothing than what the people wore on their back already. The mission had been so haphazard that even some of the newly recruited guards had no shoes and no extra food with them, so it's not even that the deportees were being treated terribly. The people overseeing it and assigned to this post were in the same boat. It was horribly planned and horribly executed. So on the 18th of May, the swamp island of Nazino was suddenly overrun with thousands of peasants, consisting of 322 women and 4,556 men, with 27 dead bodies of people who had died on the barges on the journey over. And if the island wasn't already just completely inundated and ill-prepared for the people that were already there, just 9 days later, another 1,200 people arrived, which signed the island's death warrant. So as you can imagine, if you are trapped basically on an island with no food, like, what are you going to do? You're either going to fight for your life, like survival of the fittest, or you're just gonna die. So many islanders would try to escape, but those of them that did so and got caught were shot dead, and their bodies were left to sink to the bottom of the river Ob, never to be found again. And remember, they had 20 tons of flour, but no way to cook it, so many people resorted to mixing it with icy water and consuming it that way, or just would eat the flour in its powder form. And because of this and this serious lack of nutrition, many of these new islanders became very ill. And because the guards were being based off the island on the river's edge, some of the islanders would try to build rafts to escape, but the rafts would basically just collapse under the weight of these people, leaving hundreds of people just flapping out in the water. Some would drown, and then some would make it back to safety. However, many few would survive that, because the guards that were stationed along the riverbanks would, whenever possible, pick these people off one by one, just shooting them dead like a fish in a barrel. And those that actually managed to get back to safety on the riverbanks were not actually safe. guards would hunt them down like animals. Now, the people that were left on the island and that hadn't tried to escape and were basically in good standing broke off into factions and gangs as a way to survive. Those gangs that would be stronger than others would just terrorize the weakest among them. It was very much survival of the fittest. People would be murdered in fights over the little amount of food and resources on the island. Some people would be killed for their gold tooth fillings, which became a very short-lived currency on the island. Now, despite the absolute chaos that is ensuing on this island, the orders given to the guards remained the same. There was no budging on the way that this was going to be handled. Anybody that attempted to leave the island would be shot dead without question. Some doctors were sent over to the island to check on the people, but they quickly left in fear for their lives because these guards offered them no protection, and as you can imagine, the people on the island were out for blood, so anybody that was coming over from the mainland, they were looked at as like prey. Like, what can I take from you? What can I use to survive based off what you have? So it was a very dangerous situation. And within a few weeks of people being on this island, the authorities realized that they had lost complete control of the people. So, where does this whole concept of cannibalism come into play? Well, the last doctors to leave the island reported that death had become so common that there were at least over 70 new deaths in one day, with many of the bodies exhibiting signs of cannibalism. And as mentioned early on in the video, in less than 3 months' time, over 4,000 of the islanders had either disappeared or died. An estimated 1,000 of them had been murdered, with the rest dying of starvation, disease, or accidental deaths. When further Soviet authorities arrived on the island and saw what had happened, they shut it down. But what they would report back was nothing short of a horror story. Some of the survivors were transferred to smaller settlements, but many of them died as they were being moved because they were so weak. Now, this is what's interesting. A recorded 157 islanders were kept on this island due to health reasons, but recent research suggests they may have been left behind for another reason. The survivors began telling horrific stories of what had taken place on Nazino Island. Witnesses claimed that people were murdering each other all over the place, left and right. Like, this sounds like an old historical version of Hunger Games. One little girl. It was reported that one girl had been tied to a small tree where she had her flesh cut off and eaten by starved islanders. Gangs of cannibals were formed who would systematically kill to eat the flesh from the bodies and trade other body parts for gold teeth. Many of the victims were cut up while they were still alive, only to die of massive blood loss, which is just devastating. At times, human remains were used to keep fires burning due to the extreme cold of the region and lack of consumables, which I can only imagine just smelled horrible. And some authorities reported they saw strips of human flesh hanging from trees as a way to be seasoned in the open air. A male survivor from the island claimed that the cannibal gangs only ate human organs. They would use small twigs as skewers, cut the organs into chunks, and roast them on a fire. And others spoke of stories where people on the verge of death were simply murdered for their flesh. The authorities discovered 31 mass grave sites where 70 or so half-eaten corpses were stacked one on top of another. Every eatable part of the corpses had been consumed. Survivors would claim that these cannibal gangs, though vicious, would only pick off people who appeared to be dying, which of course was little consolation to those actually murdered for food, but I guess at least there was some system to their madness. There was a female survivor who was rescued and deported to another camp that had no calves. And when questioned about it, she said that all the flesh on her calves had been cut off on Death Island, where they were grilled and eaten. And somehow she was able to still walk around unaided. After visiting the island and witnessing the rife cannibalism on display, an official named Vasily Belichico created a detailed report and sent it to Stalin and his government. This report, as you can imagine, was classified almost immediately, and this is what would remain locked and unknown to the country until 1988. It wouldn't be until about 2006 when the world would find out about Nazino through a book called Cannibal Island by French historian Nicholas Worth. Today, Nazino is referred to as Death Island, or Cannibal Island among Russians who'd dared look into the story. According to my research, no one lives there, but the island is still visited by local people for the bark of the trees. They will sometimes tell stories of ghostly voices in the icy wind, forever prolonging the horror that was Cannibal Island. So I am sorry to disappoint anybody that was hopeful that Cannibal Island was still active and alive, because it is not. And I am sure the world would know about it if it was. I also read that as of 2018, the island was actually almost entirely flooded. I don't know if that has actually changed though, and there is a group of locals that will actually travel to the island to place a wreath at the foot of a wooden cross on the island, and it is a gesture of remembrance for the victims of the horrific events that unfolded there in the summer of 1933. So that concludes today's case of the Cannibal Island of Death. Richie and friends, I certainly hope that this lived up to your expectations of what the Cannibal Island was all about. I want to leave it with one interesting fact about the island that absolutely blows my mind. So the grass on the island was head high, so it was very tall, and some locals would go over there to gather berries, and when they did so, they would return just terrified after discovering corpses in the grass and stick shelters full of skeletons after this had already been shut down. Can you imagine going there looking for berries or other resources and walking through these tall blades of grass to just come across corpse after corpse and skeleton after skeleton? Oh my gosh, absolutely not. So I will leave you with that interesting Until next time.